Good evening and welcome to our event, the Ukraine. A year ago this week, a 40-mile convoy of Russian tanks approached the Ukrainian border in what was supposed to be a Russian military exercise. Now, that military exercise became an invasion and then a full-out war. At first, it was supposed to last only a couple of weeks, but there's no sign of it ending anytime soon, no sign of peace talks anytime soon. Instead, the West has sent billions of pounds in weaponry to Ukraine. In the UK, there has been minimal scrutiny of this, despite the effect that such massive sums of money are making on ordinary people's living standards in this country. And the US today pledged another $500 million in artillery ammunition, Javelin missiles and howitzers, on top of the billions already sent. Also today, US President Joe Biden made a surprise visit to Kyiv to meet President Zelensky. It was the day after Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, challenged China's top foreign policy official Yang Wi about the possibility that China would send arms to Russia. So far, China's only sent defense clothing to Russia, though President Putin has now asked for military aid. Secretary of State Blinken said, "I was able to share with him, as President Biden had shared with President Xi, the serious consequences that would have for our relationship." Now, this is clearly an extraordinarily threatening statement to China, given the amount of weaponry that the US has supplied to Ukraine. So far, and without today's 500 million, it's $100 billion worth. So here to help tease out this and other matters with us tonight is Professor Layne Hartsell, who's joining us from Thailand. Layne Hartsell has been a farmer, a Buddhist monk. He's gone on hunger strike for farmers' rights. He's worked with a Lakota medicine woman and her group to take provisions from Denver to the people at Wounded Knee. And he's also been an academic. He was research professor at the Center for Ethics in Science and Technology in Chulalongkorn University, Bangkok. Said that very quickly because I'm not sure I'm saying it right. And he was also a research fellow at the Asia Institute, where he was working in something called Convergence, which brings together a lot of different disciplines and looks to the future. He's the author of 2 books, including one called Post-Truth, which I think is a very important thing for us to look at these days. Professor Hartsell, your work has been about bringing people together, mostly in communities and in intellectual sharing groups. And this war in Ukraine is driving people apart, even people within a country. How would you go about bringing people together?
Well, first of all, Jean and group, I really, it's an honor for me to be with you all, people that are thinking, that are getting together to study. I call it open source study, and then to reach out and to talk to other people in other parts of the world. I think this is how it should happen, or this is a good model for learning. I call it, just continuing adult education. And so yes, thank you for the invite, and thank you, Liam, for connecting us. In the case of my work, it was interesting that you brought up the Wounded Knee. I did do work at Wounded Knee there. It's been about 30 years ago when I was quite young, and my view on Wounded Knee hasn't changed. And if maybe all of you don't know, Wounded Knee is the most impoverished district or area of the United States. It goes way back to a massacre that occurred in the late 19th century, and on and on. It's a really awful story, and it's a story that that signifies what's been done in the United States to the Native Americans, to the Native peoples that had lived there before. So, being in my mid-20s, I left. This story kind of goes into the matter of war. I had wanted to apply to medical school, and I did, but I didn't get accepted the first time. I got an interview, but after I had seen the information on the condition of Native Americans in the United States, I abandoned medical school or any interest in that and took up philosophy, which is what I kind of do professionally for a long time. So, and then that led to reading Gandhi and Thoreau and Tolstoy and on and on it goes until we come to someone like, say, Helen Caldicott tonight, related to nuclear non-proliferation and getting rid of these atrocious weapons. So that's a roundabout answer or approach to getting into the topic. Now, in the case of being a professor, I'm not a professor like, say, that governs the university. There are like university professors. I'm more just a professor that works on, grants on specific, like, say, scientific or whatever topic. So I'm more like a hybrid between a high school science teacher and a professor. It's not so glamorous of a position, but nevertheless, I've had a chance to work at some great institutions and with some really great scientists from all over the world.
Why do you think the peace process has been abandoned?
Yeah,
I mean, it's really never got underway, has it? They abandoned it after about 10 days of talks at the very beginning, and then the weapons started piling in.
Mm-hmm. Well, to jump into the specific topic, yeah, there's so much going on, and there's a divisiveness that comes out of who's on the right side and who's peaceful and who's aggressive and all of this kind of thing, that it takes a lot of explaining, a lot of understanding of history, a lot of understanding of policy to even to get into talk about this thing. And I suspect that some members of your group are going to be a lot better in different areas than say I would be. And I'm approaching the talk tonight as if I'm a member of the public participating in public dialogue with some expertise in say science and technology. Okay, so the peace process that, and I've talked to other people about this before, obviously. It's funny because if you select a certain date, then someone could say, oh, but before that, there was something else, or after that, something else happened. And, people start selecting dates all over the map. And then it leads into so many different tangents that it's hard. I mean, we could go all the way back to the importance of Ukraine and the mega sites, 9,000 years ago or something, and how important it was. So, it's hard to start at any point because we could go back to the Prince of Muscovy, for example, when Moscow was just some kind of backwater place. But I tend to stick with the post 1991 fall of the Berlin Wall, and Gorbachev, and then Yeltsin, and then Putin, and on up, and the fact that NATO was in place because, of course, you had the USSR sitting right there in Europe, Germany. And incidentally, Stalin had said that he would give up Germany if there weren't a NATO and a military alliance, armed against the Soviet Union on its border. That goes back to the before everything. But anyway, going back to that time, there uh, anyone would think that NATO shouldn't be a part of the world order, that it should be a UN order, in my opinion. And I mean, we do need an overarching, but we don't need a military alliance as an overarching system. A military alliance such as NATO has no function other than, of course, threat. It's a threatening system. And even though they say that it's a peaceful, non-aggressive entity, it's been involved in, well, off the top of my head, what was it, 3 different invasions. So Libya, the Balkans, and Afghanistan, I think. Maybe there's one more. NATO is not a peaceful entity. It's a military alliance. It's aggressive, and it's in place to project U.S. power. And I'm quoting the head of NATO, Stoltenberg. So now, if we agree that NATO is an aggressive military alliance and it projects U.S. power, that's why it's in place. Again, quoting them, quoting NATO. I mean, this is is it Stoltenberg?
Okay.
Stoltenberg. Okay. There's a video of him talking to President Trump. Trump's position was to keep NATO, but he wanted Europe to pay for it. But there's a video of them talking, and Stoltenberg says to Trump, NATO's in place to project U.S. power. Okay, I don't know any country in the world that would accept this. I don't know any person in the world that should accept that.
But
Now,
we do, don't we? And you know, NATO, they're willing to fight a proxy war with Russia, but they don't appear to be doing anything concrete to stop it. And they're not prepared to bring Vladimir Putin to justice. Now, there's been no mention of him, you know, being brought to justice at The Hague, for example, or being condemned. I think UN condemned the invasion right at the start, but there's been no follow-up to that. Now, why do you think that is? Do you think NATO is afraid?
okay, well, I was laying the basis of what I think that anyone could agree upon related to NATO. And that this is important because there are many people, very intelligent people that are accomplished, and you know, everything, that think that NATO is a good thing. It's not aggressive. It's including Fall, Mike Fall from the University of Stanford, who talks to the Zelensky regularly and worked for the CIA and so forth. He just gave a lecture 2 months ago at Stanford on this topic and said these kind of things. So anyway, so if we can agree on the situation of NATO and the United States, then we can turn to how do, say, the Baltics and the Kaliningrad countries, Poland and Czechoslovakia, and then the Balkan states, which are, of course, right there in Eurasia. You know, that's the heart of Eurasia. How might they look at NATO, and then how would Russia see it? So if you remember, in I guess it was 2002, Putin wanted to join NATO. He was apparently pro-West, and I don't think there was any indication that this was some kind of charade or something. I think that he was honestly for joining NATO, and probably because they wanted to have some say in how NATO works. And if you can't get rid of it, well, you might as well join it and then affect it. But of course, they were rebuffed for a long time. And then around, I guess, 2014, after Maidan and the conflicts there, then sometime after that, Russia became more, how should we say, showing hostility towards NATO more. Although, Gorbachev and Yeltsin, they both didn't want NATO close by, and I don't think any Russian would want NATO close by. So this is I'm laying out the sketch of the how the tensions happened. So you have basically these large geopolitical tensions, and there's Ukraine with a lot of mines and a lot of good land sitting right in the middle, and has typically been major area when there's conflict in Europe, such as invasion of Russia 3 times in the past 200 years. The Russians don't like that. And no, it wouldn't matter if Mahatma Gandhi were president of Russia. And this is the thing is, I think that people get caught up on Putin, who's a pretty awful person, obviously. But even if Mahatma Gandhi were president of Russia, you'd still have the same threat and the same concern that the Russian people would have. And likewise, I think the people in Ukraine would be upset. So how did the peace process get stalled? Well, there's supposed to be a neutral zone between the two countries. This is a very standard kind of idea. Say like Austria is a good example of an autonomous area. It's perfectly fine to put an autonomous area that between belligerent countries, such as Minsk II agreement, that's managed by the UN, that brings in the security of all the different states that are around that particular area that are important. It wouldn't need the United States, and so forth. And this would be the peace process. Well, this broke down, obviously. And so again, why did this break down, or how did this happen? I suspect that the powers that the United States has in particularly controlling Europe, and also wanting to confront Russia and China, it's like a kind of it's like a presupposition. It's like it's got to happen, and so in that case, it's going to be quite hard to hold back an aggressive superpower. And I think that's what's happening.
There have been a lot of financial institutions involved in Ukraine. President Zelensky signed memoranda of agreement with BlackRock, with JP Morgan, with the US government. Now, what's that about? We're seeing this huge amount of money being poured into this country, presumably when aggression ceases, though when that will be is anybody's guess with the amount of weapons that they're putting in. So what are these companies playing at, basically?
Well, I think there was a second question there. We can go back to it that I didn't answer, but on this particular question, they were talking about a Marshall Plan for Ukraine back in, oh gosh, it must have been almost right after the war started, so maybe early summer, and of course the companies, Bechtel or BlackRock or any of those big infrastructure companies or investment companies are going to want to get in there. Well, first of all, as I mentioned, Ukraine is a very, very rich area. It's geopolitically important. It has the mining. It has all the things why the Nazis wanted Ukraine, for example. So it's a standard U.S. colonization program, right? So you go in with this kind of neoliberal position. You bring Ukraine into the orbit of the United States. No, I think they're kind of hopeful thinking here. I don't think this war is going to end. Personally, I don't think this war is going to end anytime soon, unless something. You never know with these things. Something could come out of the blue, but also nuclear war could come out of the blue too, which you can kind of see that on the horizon. So I think there's a bit hopeful thinking, wishful thinking that they're going to begin to rebuild or repair Ukraine for a while. I think that the people there are going to really suffer. Their infrastructure is being taken out. The Russians are increasing on that. Civilian structures, of course, are being hit, although it's not like the United States went into Iraq and bombs. So I think it was a British general or commentator who had said, well, the Russians didn't go in like we thought they would go in, which is like we would go in and do something. So the Russians have taken out, strategic, important things like, say, energy infrastructure and so forth. but it hasn't been an all-out just bombing and yet that we know,
They've
nothing like that.
also destroyed a great many of the cultural monuments in Ukraine in much the
Yes.
same way that the Azerbaijanis have been doing in Armenia. And it seems to be quite a deliberate policy to try and pretend that there is no such thing as a Ukrainian culture, when, as you say, it goes back for thousands of years, as indeed does
Yes.
the Armenian one. And this kind of thing is, I mean, we all lose from that, because Ukraine has such beautiful churches and buildings and all of it being bombed. The New York Times identified something like 339 places of culture had been destroyed. So, it is, will Putin ever, give up on trying to get Ukraine? Or will he settle, do you think, for Donbass, which is a bit like Scotland? It's going to carry on fighting for independence, whatever happens, I think.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that Scotland's in a bit of a same kind of predicament, except there's not a major geopolitical tectonic shift going on right on top of you. If there were, then I think Scotland would probably look a lot like Iraq or Yemen or Ukraine, which I hope it never does. In the case of Ukraine, with the going back in history, again, it's one of those kind of things that people are unfortunate to live in a really important place that has a lot of resources and all of that. And both Europe and Asia want to have some type of control in that area, particularly with the rise of Asia, with China and India coming on board, and then there's MENA, Middle East, North Africa, and then ASEAN. And so no doubt there's these other major forces that are pressing in this particular area. So sure. The other thing I wanted to say is, yeah, I'm certainly any empire or any state is going to want Ukraine. I suppose Romania, if it had the power, would take Ukraine. I mean, this is what states do. So any state's going to do that. It doesn't matter whether it's Russia or whatever. So yeah.
Can I just ask you one final question? What do you agree with all the weapons being sent to Ukraine? I personally feel it's extending the war tremendously. But I know that many people and the majority of people in the UK are in favour of it, and on the basis of something very rational, which is that people are allowed to defend themselves. But we have, for me, we've extended the war, and
well, sure, and these kinds of how should we say? These are very delicate issues, right? Because these kinds of issues can split even peaceful people, even people that are outwardly peaceful, because of the fact that naturally we're going to defend ourselves, or we're going to try. We don't. I think it'd be pathological just to lay down and do nothing. I mean, Mahatma Gandhi talked about you have to be able to do violence before you can be nonviolent. So you should know how to shoot a gun. And when I tell people this, they say, "Oh no, Gandhi, you have to, turn the other cheek." And I said, "No, you need to know how to shoot a gun if you want to be Gandhian or nonviolent." And I don't want to ask people here if they know how to shoot a gun, but yes, everybody should know how to shoot a gun. Now, moving to, yeah, you should know how to inflict violence and defend yourself. And so in other words, the teaching is courage, and then using courage in a way that's intelligent. And so he had this whole idea of satyagraha and so forth. But anyway, why this is so divisive is because you have an outright aggressor, and everybody's pointing to Putin as this kind of evil only menace. I mean, it's evil, it's menacing, and all that kind of thing. Yes, but it's not the only pressure in the area. And this is what people need to understand. So when we talk about using violence, and I'm not 100% pacifist, but I do think that violence should be, very, very rarely used. And it must be in a situation that's so clear that, you can't deny it. But I think that the international law, the UN Security Council, all of this stuff is worked out. This is not anything new. There's nothing new happening, I think. It's not like we're being invaded from aliens, although in the United States we think we are. But anyway, so getting to the crux of this issue is that if you go at different levels again and look at where violence should be used, then we might get a better understanding. So if you're a farmer in the Ukrainian, say the farming area, and Russian soldiers show up menacing at your house, you probably are going to defend yourself. At least I hope so. In the case of when you get up to states clashing that have thermonuclear weapons, this is a whole different matter. I mean, defending yourself in a street fight or somebody coming to your house or this kind of thing is totally different than if you have these armed sides that can launch a tactical nuclear weapon, which was say 5 times bigger than Hiroshima, which that's a major weapon, but that's a tactical weapon. And then you get into thermonuclear war. The other thing is when these massive states get involved and they start sending in hardware, that's going to escalate a situation. And wanting a military victory and a triumphalist kind of attitude about that, I think is dangerous, especially when you have something as powerful as, say, Russia on the other side and the United States on one side. But even something like India and Pakistan, I mean, that's a really dangerous place too, there along that northern border. So yeah, I think that when people talk about the use of violence, Ukrainians defending themselves and all that stuff, I think that this is a total this is like a childish framing, and it's very dangerous.
Yeah. And final question. Do you think that this, the advent of China perhaps into this is going to make things worse? I find that very horrifying.
Did you say that Biden went to Kyiv?
Yeah, he was.
Did I hear you say that
today? Mm-hmm.
I didn't see that news. Okay, so, well, I think that the United States.
I was going to say Putin had been scheduled to send some missiles over, but once he realized that Biden was on the spot, he didn't send them over. So he waited till Biden had gone. Biden was actually on his way to Poland. Yeah. So he held off the missiles while Biden was there.
Well, yeah, you don't want to spark a nuclear war or something here, which is what they're getting close to. Okay, so the question about China, I think this is the real core of the issue that the United States is probably getting at. Not only is the United States using Europe to confront Russia, and this is, everybody keeps calling this a proxy war or a new Cold War. This is a war. The United States is training the Ukrainian military on U.S. soil. I think it's in Nebraska or Kansas. I can't remember, but one of the military.
We are too.
You're training them.
Have been since 2015. We've been training Ukrainians.
Okay,
so.
Okay. Yes. And while this is going on, the U.S. is doing this, and then sending in massive hardware. The tanks will arrive, I hear, in 4 to 6 months or something, and so forth. I think that China is the real one that the United States is concerned about. It shouldn't be. China's not a major threat, but that's the one. And I think that the rise of China has really caught the West. I call it the West because everybody else does it. It has caught the West off guard with the rapid development, people are looking at China and going, why do they have, say, high-speed trains in the United States? We have the Amtrak that goes 50 miles per hour or 80 kilometers per hour. And also, what is it? They blew up some kind of, had some kind of wreck and the train blew up. The oversight is bad, the engineering's bad, and so forth. So we've got a toxic mess in, I think it's Pennsylvania or Ohio, I can't remember. So yeah, I think that China is a major factor here. Now, is China arming, are the Chinese arming Russia? That one, I don't know of. I mean, you get so much information, you can't tell what's up and down, right?
Mhm.
So I don't know. I mean, I suspect that China doesn't want the United States to collapse Russia and be on its border. Almost undoubtedly, the Chinese are sending, say, to information technology systems, ICT, maybe some small weapons, maybe vehicles. I don't know, this kind of stuff.
I gather they're not sending much at the moment, but they're being asked, they're being called on now.
They're being asked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. That was very informative.
Yes.
And thanks a lot
Yes.
for being with us.
Sure.
May I just ask? Can I just ask something? Is
Sure.
something that you
Sure.
said, Jean, about, and I've been thinking about this myself. Is the way that we're arming Ukraine from America and from UK and what have you, and you mentioned this figure of 100 billion in weapons. Well, does Ukraine have 100 billion in their coffers? And if
No.
not, does that not mean that they're now in a massive debt, which they'll never get out of?
Yes, yes, it does. And what it also means is that we're paying for it in this country. Our government has gone straight ahead and ordered all these weapons. So it looks as though we've got good exports, which is keeping the balance of the inflation rate probably at 10%. But we know when you go into the supermarket and things have gone up by 25% or 50%.
Yes, there's pictures all over the net of empty shelves. Mind you, I would have to say that the shelves in Morrison's in Johnston are not empty; they're fine.
Well, we're relieved for you, Ray.
But it is that sort of knock-on thing that you say, oh, we'll help you, but then you say you're not actually helping. What you're doing is incurring massive debt. How is that help? And why is Zelensky agreeing to this?
Yeah, and of course these huge, massive American companies getting involved is, corporations have almost brought down currencies before. So these people
Vietnam generated trillions, quadrillions of cash for the arms industry.
Yeah.
So obviously, that's their bottom line.
Yeah, and that's what's happening now. Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to what Ray said, I mean, war is, extremely profitable for investors and companies and so on, and there is a drive in capitalism to have wars, to use up their weapons because they need to keep making some more and so on. So I suppose the question for us is, how do we, how can we break that cycle? What can we do to end this constant drive for war?
Yeah. Yeah. Poetry and music doesn't quite cut it, does it?
Well, it helps, but it's yeah.
The Europeans have had some success in blunting this kind of war kind of thing, and also the various nuclear arms treaties like the NPT and so forth. And these were really effective at, toning this threat down and so forth. I wanted to make a comment that in around, what was it, 2015 or 2016, something like that, that we have a politician by the name of Sarah Palin in the United States. I don't know if any of you know who she is.
Oh, yes.
She's a
Oh, yes, we do.
Republican, and she, she's okay. So in 2015 or 16, whatever, as Trump was becoming president, she wanted to be the energy secretary, the secretary of the energy department, the head of the energy department, because she said, of course, all of those minerals and stuff they have in Alaska, she knows how to manage everything. But there was a bit of a sigh of relief because the energy department manages the nuclear stockpile. And we thought, and of course, I hear that, I think, we're going to get rid of the nuclear stockpile. Now that would save a lot of money. But unfortunately, that wasn't her aim, to get rid of that. She thought the energy department managed the energy infrastructure, and she wanted to get rid of that and put it in the private hands. So that was kind of a funny aside.
Yeah. It's,
Statements like that should disqualify anybody, but
well, yeah, I think we have a lot of politicians that are not qualified by nature.
There is a non-proliferation treaty that I think it's over 75 countries have signed now, and it was meant to be 51 countries. When 51 countries have signed it, then it should be international law. So, according to that, all countries that are still holding on to nuclear weapons and building them up are breaking international law, you know. But who's going to take them to court, and how can that happen?
Helen Caldicott has this. Have you seen this before? This is ICANN's Don't Bank on the Bond.
Yeah.
This is a divestment project that they've gotten with the banks around the world to not invest in nuclear weapons.
Yeah. There's been a drive here for that, but I don't, money doesn't seem to have much morality really, unless it's the co-op bank or something like that.
Well, it should be pointed out that the Ukrainians gave up their nuclear weapons, but it doesn't seem to have done them any good.
But then they started talking about wanting to reintroduce them, which was one of the things that I think was a flashpoint for Putin. Is that Liam will tell us probably.
Well, I think all I'd say to that is that Ukraine giving up their nuclear weapons was one of the key founding principles and agreements that gave Ukraine. So if you look at it from that point of view, you have to take a sort of circumspect view of Russia's almost, it's as almost an automatic foreign policy, which says that any proxy such as NATO, which will involve effectively nuclear weapons and actually on our border, are undermining the constitution of Ukraine in the first place, which is a pretty difficult, I think we have moved and slid and been so selective about the arguments and the narrative to the point, where we in this country, we certainly, today we're celebrating a year's kind of anniversary of this war, but of course it's not a year's old war. With the best will in the world, it's 9 years old. And then there are hundreds of years of history that have to be contended with. So, I think the question of Ukraine giving up its nuclear weapons is to say it didn't do Ukraine any good. I think that's a mistake, because what it did for Ukraine was gave birth to Ukraine. That had to be negotiated at some point.
It seems strange that NATO can demand that a country give up its nuclear weapons in order to sort of whatever, but America doesn't have to. where's the logic in that? America's got, and we've got them in, you know, up the road. We've got them up literally up the road in Helensburgh, little seaside town, and yet, and here they are, and they're all over America, goodness knows where. It just seems an illogical scenario, almost like so rules. It's like almost with the sort of average politician is rules for me, but not for you.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't NATO's demand; it was Russia's demand.
Well, it's a reasonable demand, isn't it?
Absolutely, of course.
It's a reasonable demand, and then NATO has caused this conflict in real terms, have they not, with Russia and Ukraine? You know, by expansion, by the very nature of expansion, they're bound to come up to a point where someone's going to say no. And Putin, of course,
what do you think about that, Layne? What do you think about that point of view? It's quite a common point of view in this, on the left in this country, that NATO expansionism is why Putin went in.
Layne.
I think that, again, I think that Russia, or, you know, take a small country like Romania, would invade and take Ukraine if they could. But that's not the real world. They can't just go in and take Ukraine. There's a lot of, you know, there are a lot of treaties. There's a lot of military in place that would prevent that. And the Russian army would probably want to go on over into Europe further if it could, but that would be the end of Russia. So I think that what they're settled for is they want some kind of buffer zone there. And there's this one philosopher that, have you heard of I forgot his name now, but anyway, this one Russian philosopher that he's kind of like a ultra nationalist, and you know, they say that he's the brain of Putin and so forth and so on. But if you read the stuff that he writes, Putin is doing his own thinking. It's not coming from the philosopher, but the philosopher is the spirit of Putin, and that controlling the world island and all of that kind of nonsense. It's kind of fantasy, right? It's like a sci-fi fantasy that this philosopher has. That's, I think, what Russia would do if it could.
Do you sort of envisage an end to this Russian-American scenario that's been going on since God knows when, since the Russian Revolution? I mean, and it's, do you see a sort of a logical end, almost like a philosophical end to it, because it is utterly ridiculous. It just, and you know, and just this whole thing of like, my God, here we are in the 21st century, and we're still like school kids in the yard.
I don't know, maybe if a comet were headed this way, then people might would. I don't think so. I mean, I don't know, but I don't think so. I think that the confrontation with Asia is going to be really the main thing. I mean, they want to expand something like NATO across to all the way to Australia.
Could I just ask you a question on that, Layne? I'm actually a wee bit surprised that you would say, you know, that the Red Army would, albeit in some kind of science fiction scenario, march on into sort of Germany and, you know, middle Europe, or because I yesterday I took the dog for a long walk.
I was saying that because of Dugin's work, the philosopher I was talking about. If you read his stuff, yeah.
But,
so this kind of sci-fi kind of ideas, you know, Russia takes over and you have this world island that everybody wants to control, but they've got it.
Well, yes, on a kind of level of sci-fi and fiction, I understand that there might be an idea of that, but in answer to the question, you know, is there philosophically any potential to see an end to this kind of Russian-American? And as I was about to say, I walked the dog yesterday, and I'd saved various bits of media and you know, kind of erudite generals and all the things that Radio 4 had prepared for me to listen to on this anniversary of Ukraine. And I listened to it with a very careful filter on, and I was asking exactly the same question: is there any possible end to this? And the one thing that I came back to was that exact question, which is, I mean, I can only see that the vested interests in this war lie with America. That there's undoubtedly no vested interest for Europe. It's not really benefiting Ukraine, and it's not benefiting Russia. So to me, it's an astonishing situation. But the only way I can see that we are persuaded as a kind of middleman in Europe is that we have to buy this central belief that Vladimir Putin sits on top of an expansionist regime. Now, the question, and not as a sort of sci-fi, or I'm not asking about I'm not asking
One
about.
thing I said,
I don't mean the contents of Putin's brain on this, but what I'm interested in is how would you see any historical precedent to suggest that Russia has those ambitions?
well, I don't think, I mean, you could, I mean, how did Russia get to be what it is, right? So go back to the Ukrainian mega sites and then move up from there. I mean, we can go up to different periods along the way, you know, for millennia, you know, when the ice age, you know, started melting back, and you had this exposed area, which was wonderful. And you know, the cultures that developed there, what we're learning is, you know, is a pretty incredible place. Okay, but you know, going up to just the last modern era, like the last 300 years or something, Russia's been expansionist and would if it could. But I said any state would do that. I mean, Norway, does Norway to have some of your oil from Scotland? I don't know. Something there in the North Sea or the ocean, the Norwegians have kind of usurped certain oil wells, you know. So even Norway would probably expand if it could. This is the very core of a state system.
So the whole rationale for war is always justifiable, because we must win, because if we don't, it'll be you next.
Yes, I think that's the system that we have right now in place.
Yeah.
It's 1984, isn't it?
It's an answer.
It's 1984. Yeah, we've got to crush Goldstein's fictitious army. Unbelievable. The only difference here is that it's actually been acted out in real terms. So yes. You know, we're kind of, you know. So does it end, or do people simply retreat back behind their borders? Or, you know, what's next is a little scary.
Say so.
Yeah, well, Trump policy is that very policy that Ray said.
I don't understand. Sorry, I don't understand. What do you mean?
You retreat back to your own border and just do your thing there.
See, right.
That's Trump. It's not workable. But
yeah.
It's probably the one sensible thing he said ever. You know, because America elected an imbecile with the IQ of a sick bag. Unbelievable that this man was an utter imbecile. What did he say? He was at a rally. I don't know where, but it's on YouTube somewhere. He's at a rally, and he says, it comes off script, of course, which they tell him not to do. It comes off script, and he says to an audience, I've studied American history, and the way they won the American Civil War, this is going, you know, the war of sort of the gray and the blue, he's talking about, is they took over the airports.
I don't know what to say. I'm sorry.
There's nothing to say after that. You know, and this man has his finger on the button.
Yeah, or had. Well, I tell you what, Ray, let's have some of your wonderful poetry now. Thank you all for the
That
discussion.
was good. That was a really good conversation. No doubt about it.
Well, what
Thanks.
we'll do, and thank you again, Layne, taking more of your time than I thought. We're going to do some poetry readings now.